So as Paul just mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit today about the energy lives of refugees. And I should say I'm no longer at UNITAR, actually. I'm now at the Stockholm Environment Institute, based in their Oxford office. And I still have my research fellowship at the University of Oxford, which was funded by the Independent Social Research Foundation, who also funded the book that I'm going to talk about today. And in Paul's lovely introduction, he said that I'm working on a book. I've finished it and I've published it. So I'm going to talk about it today. So with that self-intro done, I just wanted to highlight that there are three sections of today's talk. Firstly, I'm going to talk about some insights into the everyday life of refugees, where energy is used in refugee camps, and also how refugee communities access energy, including some renewable and sustainable solutions. And then thirdly, I'm going to come on to considerations of politics and some of the criticisms of the international humanitarian aid system in terms of energy, although one could criticise it more broadly than that. And I'm going to show quite a lot of photos and images from my time living and working in refugee camps, especially in Kenya and Rwanda. For those of you who are interested in the book, that's what it looks like. That's the front cover. It's actually been published open access as part of Berghahn's Forced Migration series, which I'm delighted about because none of my practitioner colleagues and friends wanted to pay for it. So they all get to read it for free, and now so do you guys. Just one thing to say before I start, in case I'm talking to a room full of electrical engineers, which I don't know if I am because all I can see is a delightful whiteboard. But if I am speaking to a room full of electrical engineers, much of what I'll say today is not just about energy technologies, but highlights the politics and governance issues embedded within access to energy. So it's much more about the systems and the structures and the institutions and the organisations and the businesses than it is about technologies. And that's not just my personal perspective, that is the sector. So I'll start with a little intro on camps. For those of you that don't know much about refugee camps, this is a picture of Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. It's much, much, much bigger than this. It's 220,000 people, over that now, I think. It is one of the largest refugee camps in the world. Dadaab in Kenya was just short of 500,000 people. Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, the associated camps there, are nearly 1 million people. There are a couple of camps in Uganda that are upwards of 250,000 people as well. But most refugee camps, and in Jordan they also have very, very large camps, most refugee camps are somewhere between sort of 15,000 people to something like 35,000 people. So a large town. They're not just like a cluster of 10 camp huts or, you know, sort of tents. That's emergency camps. But most camps are protracted, which means that they've been there for at least a year. In some cases, since 1947, or the camps in Bangladesh have been there since the 1970s. Kakuma has been there since 1991. These are not short-term places. Some people live in tents, others live in small homes with like corrugated iron, sheets for roofs. You can see some of that from the picture here. In some other locations with mud and brick homes, some people using some of the tent materials they had when they arrived to build more semi-permanent structures. And I should note that today's talk will focus on refugee camps in the global south, particularly in Kenya and Rwanda, where I've done a lot of my field work, and doesn't really go more broadly than that because the situations are so varied. But if anybody does want to reach out afterwards and talk about other situations, I'm happy to. In other places, such as refugees who live in urban areas in Jordan, or refugee families who have moved to the global north, for example, who are living in Europe, the energy situations are quite different to what I will present today. So I'm not presenting the whole of refugee energy, just sort of one part of it. So I'll start with a couple of facts and figures. Who lacks access to energy in refugee camps? Energy access rates are falling in real terms. Millions of people worldwide are forcibly displaced. There's now over 120 million forcibly displaced people. Of those, only a proportion are refugees. Refugees are considered to be people who have crossed a border internationally. Whereas the vast majority, or a considerable majority, of the world's forcibly displaced people are internally displaced people, refugees within their own country, and they have been displaced due to war and conflict and all sorts of other things. In terms of the energy access that those people have, Chatham House modelling has done quite a detailed job of this and suggests that 94% of forcibly displaced people living in camps do not have meaningful access to power. So they may have torches, batteries, a solar lantern, or some kerosene, but they don't have substantial electricity access. And 81% lack anything other than the most basic fuels for cooking. So that's cooking on freestone fires or small basic cook stoves. These people are not having ovens and microwaves and kettles. Sometimes they do, but that's a different story. We quite often say no access in the energy access world, but it's actually a bit of a misterm, because no access in this space means no access to sustainable, reliable, affordable, or modern energy access, which includes both electricity and cooking. But everybody needs some form of energy to survive. For example, many people have torches or burning sticks, but they don't have ovens or electricity. So we can say in many ways that refugees live in the dark in camps. Which handily is what my book is about. The aim of writing the book was really a simple one. I wanted to record and share the voices and lived experience of refugees on energy. That's something that had not been done in a substantive way before. And during my professional life, working for FCDO and others, I was discovering that those voices of refugees themselves were just being ignored, like they didn't really even exist. And I wanted to include refugee voices on both electricity and cooking to understand how and why refugees value energy, when and where energy is used in humanitarian settings, and what types of products and services people need but also already use. And along the way, I heard a great many interesting things and challenging ideas to how I was working as a practitioner, that the initial aim of the book developed considerably. And so I've also decided in the book to cover the institutional, political dimensions of energy. The slide here, sorry for all the words, I just like to actually quote some things sometimes, talks about the title of the book and what it means. So here, the title of the book, Voices in the Dark, suggests several elements to darkness. The darkness, of course, the obvious one, literal darkness, created by a lack of energy, life without light or with minimal access to light and only basic cooking fuels. But it also speaks to the more political darkness and ignorance surrounding energy choices. And we will see some of that in terms of humanitarians and how humanitarians are ignorant in the course of this presentation. But this title, Voices in the Dark, also speaks to the powerlessness felt by many refugees to be heard within the humanitarian sector on issues such as energy and climate, and the fact that they don't have a voice or a formal place in the choices that are being made for them. Don't worry, it gets more depressing than that, not less. So just a quick highlight on methodology for those of you that are academics. The book focuses on Kenya and Rwanda, as this is where I was able to spend most of my time during my research, but it also includes examples from Ethiopia, Uganda, Jordan, Bangladesh, and many of the other countries in the global south where I have visited camps. The research for the book is coming substantively out of my 4-year PhD, but draws more broadly over the last 10 years of work. In terms of methodology, I did 170 formal interviews with refugees and practitioners, and I present what I've termed an engaged energy ethnography, which is a term others use as well. And we could talk more about that if anybody has questions on methodology. But essentially, I wanted to do something that was ethnography, but went beyond looking at refugees as a community to be studied, and also a community that is an activist community and a vocal voice for change within their spaces. Quick highlight on the structure of the book. I first, and the presentation today will follow this structure. I first talk about energy for homes and families. Then I move on for energy for work and businesses. Chapter 3 covers energy for public spaces and humanitarian operations. And Chapter 4 looks at the provision of energy access in camps, before I turn finally in Chapter 5 in the conclusion to consider the politics of humanitarian energy access. Before we go into some of these themes, I just wanted to share a couple of pictures, because I love pictures, of the huge range of energy technologies, spaces and fuels used in refugee camps. You see here, these are all pictures that I've taken from refugee camps, and there are diversity of technologies. You see electricity grids, you see mobile phone shops, you see businesses selling printing and Wi-Fi services, as well as the sort of traditional charcoal and cooking technologies. You see diesel generators, and you see electricity used within humanitarian compounds. So one thing I would say is that energy use in humanitarian contexts is as varied, if in some cases not more varied, than it is in energy for development cases. So it's not the case that there's no energy or there's no use of energy in refugee camps. In many cases, it's the opposite. Within the book, I think many people expect the book to be about technologies. And in the first chapter of the book, I do consider technologies, of course, in terms of both renewable and renewable technologies, as well as considering appliances and the consumption of energy. But one of the key things I uncovered was about the very vivid social life of energy. And this is a quote from one of my practitioners, one of my refugee colleagues working on this topic. And I really delved a lot into how electricity and cooking are deeply entwined with just the everyday practice of life, with cooking dinner, texting friends, paying in shops using mobile phones, keeping our families clean and fed and safe. And this is a quote from one of my colleagues. I'll just read a little bit of it. When we were talking together about energy, he had a solar lantern, and he said, "The light is on in the nights, and my friends and brothers, they can come here and talk. They want to be together, to be talking and enjoying. I am here and talking as long as the light lasts. It is not all on all of the time, and sometimes I go home to my wife, but she is happy with the lights as more people come. I bought her new things, and now she likes the lights a lot. She is very proud, very happy about the success of his business. It is much better than with the stick, because many people use burning sticks to light their homes and businesses. The light for us is a change. Now when using things start to get better, because it is because of the light. When there was dark, it was sometimes dirty, things would spill and accidents would happen. The light stops that. The little lamp are all we need to see. I'm not making mistakes and spilling things, but my brothers coming here at the night is better. My wife has the new things and I have joy. With my brothers in the night, it is a very happy place." There's no mention of kilowatt hours in these discussions. This is symptomatic, if you like, of the types of discussions we have about energy. And so I really focus quite heavily in the first chapters of the book on those social dimensions and how important life is for living and enjoyment and quality of life. Here's some pictures of the energy and social life of spaces around the camp where people are using energy within their homes, their businesses, their shops, but also the firewood and charcoal and the dwellings where people are using energy. One of the most surprising things coming from the research was the extent to which refugees themselves sell and supply energy. And they are energy suppliers. They own energy companies, not big ones like Shell, but small micro businesses. This is everything from businesses selling solar lanterns and cooking equipment to firewood and fuel traders, to refugees creating businesses to sell electricity from diesel generation and building up those connections, those physical connections themselves. The energy economies within refugee camps are considerable, but they are also incredibly complex. I've never visited two camps where the situation is the same, where the system for provision for energy was the same. And I think I've lost count now, I think it's 54 camps so far. I'll take a moment to read this quote as an example of a refugee-led business selling energy. This is a refugee living in Kenya who during our conversation talked a lot about the uses of his energy and why that was important for his business. He said, "I'm selling it, energy, all the lights, the fan, the radio, showing people the phones are working with all the things with the phones that I am selling. It is my space. I'm liking working here. I can sell everything and a lot of people want the phones, smartphones and high-end electronics as well. I saved for the lights." He had like green fairy lights in his shop, and they pull the customers in. They say it is like Aladdin's cave, so I will be Aladdin. I'm very happy because all the people come here, not just Somalis, he was Somalian, but all the people who want special phones. I have power here. I'm connected to the big generators in the market and I pay a lot, but the power is always on. I need that to keep the things cold so that they will keep. I'm having power, but I'm also selling power. My whole business is power. I am powerful. So you see here some of the interconnectedness of people using energy and not just, talking about, oh, I sell this solar lantern and this battery and this system. They're more talking about the connections that enables. Here are some of the shops and businesses that sell these types of energy. On the left there, you can see a milk bar cafe, which is selling sort of cold milk and cold dairy drinks in Nabaheke in Rwanda. In the middle, you see an electricals shop, like a sort of very basic Currys in Kakuma, except it sells everything that people could ever need. It's got a TV in there and a fan. This picture doesn't do it justice. It was booming out energy and all sorts. And what you will see a lot of in every refugee camp in the world is spaces like this on the right. Again, the picture doesn't do it justice. These are all wires connecting mobile phones and batteries, charging up from, in this case, a big solar system that had a diesel generator as well out the back of the shop. Very informal spaces, but it gives you some indication of the types of variety that there are in terms of energy use for refugee shops and businesses. And all these businesses, in these pictures at least, are run by refugees themselves. They're not set up by international agencies. They're not run by local Kenyans, or whatever host country. They're run by refugees in that space that have created these businesses themselves. Now I'll turn briefly to one of the chapters in the book that talks about energy and community facilities. It's a completely different picture to the one I've just shown. Here we can talk about energy as absent and intermittent, where the majority of schools, hospitals, community halls and public spaces that I visited had either no energy supply or sporadic or intermittent supply. Where electricity in particular was available, it's often provided directly by NGOs or organisations who have directly bought their own generators, and they're not relying on the national grid very often, and they're also not relying on the humanitarian system to provide it. Basically, an NGO said, we haven't got any power, we need power, let's go out and buy a diesel generator and some diesel, and that's what they've done. In this example here, from a humanitarian worker living in Kenya, we were walking around his space. He was very keen to show off his generators. He said, this is my generator, but it is worth it. Now we have power all the time and can run the computers, the printer and the registrations in the office. And the students also use the power from it for lighting in the classroom and for their computer lessons. It is a very good generator. I didn't break it yet and I've had it for a long time. I have a technician friend who is working for NRC as well, and he comes sometimes to fix it. Well, not fix it because it is not broken yet, but look at it and check it is working well. I think he cleans parts. I don't know. It is a magic machine, a machine that I don't know how it works. But when it is humming and making noise, it is on and working. And then we have all the electricity we want. I will introduce you to my technician friend. I think you would know everything and like to meet a lady who wants to know everything about electricity. Because one thing I found during my research is how insanely gendered energy and particularly electricity is in refugee spaces. They were very surprised that, I quote, a lady would want to know about these things. Such as I am a lady. That's a conversation for a different time. Here are some pictures of the... I see a question from Meta. If it's okay, I'll keep the questions to the end because I'm not that able to multitask right now. But in terms of the technology, but here are some pictures of energy for community facilities. We see on the left there solar streetlights. I don't know if you can tell that's a solar streetlight, but it is in Mahama and Rwanda. In the middle, you see electricity uses such as the computers. They also have facial scanners and fingerprint scanners and things like that in the food warehouses in Kakuma in Kenya and in other places as well. On the far right, it's never very easy to take pictures of solar panels on roofs, but there is a solar panel up there at this food distribution warehouse in Kakuma in Kenya. That said, these places are not systematically electrified, which may be surprising to some of you. Now we'll turn to energy for humanitarians. Almost every humanitarian office and accommodation I visited had power, but knowledge about these connections was very rare. This is one of my favourite ever quotes of all time, but especially during my research. The person who said this was designated as an energy and environment focal point. It was their literal job to know about this. However, as you will see, there was a bit of learning to be had here. So we were talking about energy in humanitarian compounds, energy for offices. She said, this is incredible. All of these things, they are electrical and they are everywhere in the camp, on the streets and in the compounds and in my office. I've been sitting and asking, who knows about this? And no one knows. It is like a mystery. Where does it come from, all the electricity? I am thinking UNHCR because they're doing a lot of odd things. But who knows? It could be the Kenyans or anyone. I am looking every day now at the centre and I am seeing people using their phones and their computers and their scanners and wondering, why did I not think of this before? One day I sat by the generator and I asked the sweeping man, where does this, the generator, come from? He did not know, and he said that a man sometimes comes to look at it, but it always works. I was very excited and asked him, which man? Is he wearing blue, the UNHCR colour, orange, the NRC colour, or another? Has he another name? He said he didn't know, but the man was tall, with a hat on. This did not help me solve the mystery of the generator, but at least now I know what is in the box, and that it is a generator. And this lady went on quite the energy and electricity learning experience in our time together living and working in Kenya. And even now, she sometimes WhatsApps me with a picture saying, is this energy? It's always an electrical appliance. So she's never once sent me a picture of something that isn't energy, but it also isn't electrical. So the general knowledge on what is electricity and what is energy is very low in some of these spaces. So far, we've seen a rather negative picture of humanitarian energy supply, especially with that last quote. And in the book, I characterise provision as being partial, intermittent, absent or accidental. For institutions, however, energy access is provided in a different way, often via diesel generators or connection to the local grid, and is almost always substantial. So you have this dichotomy between refugee spaces where there's very little and people are doing it for themselves, and then you have these institutional spaces which are fully powered to the level that I am here today and that you guys are to be enabled this presentation. You see offices like this with, electrical water cooler, with air conditioning, with TV, with presentation, with lights, of course, with Wi-Fi, and then you see diesel generators locked away in these little boxes. And in some cases, you see national grid. This is the big picture there is the national grid running over Kagame camp in Rwanda. And when I was standing under that and taking that picture, I was speaking to one of the government officials who sort of helps to administer the camp, a humanitarian, who said, it's just too far away. We can't get electricity here. It's just too much, too far away. Refugees too isolated. And I was like, well, what about that? That's the national grid. And he was like, I never saw that before. So that level is the knowledge we're working at. I think this might speak to Meta's question, which I can't quite see, but was something about provision. So in terms of responsibilities for provision, I turn to this in chapter 5 to look at how energy is provided in the camps, who provides it, and when and where and why sometimes. And this quote shows a little bit into how these things are thought about. So with this, I was interviewing a practitioner living in Kenya, and he said, energy is underneath. It underpins so much of human activity. We need to see it as cross-cutting and embedded within people's lives. It has gone ignored for so long that the humanitarian system needs to invent a new narrative to succeed in the highly competitive world of humanitarianism. We see it everywhere. Energy, electricity, firewood, batteries, sticks for lighting and the generators. And then I am telling people this is important and they are too busy typing on the computer or texting on the phone to listen. And I say, that is energy, and they roll their eyes at me. I shout and say, listen, but no one is caring. Energy for me is not the same as energy for them. They are teeth sucking and I am thinking of people in the dark. Anybody spent a lot of time in East Africa? This is teeth sucking. If you have no battery, you have no torch. If you have no panel, you have no phone charging business. If you have no diesel, you have no lights or fan. If you have no wood, you have no food. We could make all the lists and show them, the camp operators, but do you think they would listen? I am not sure. I think they would say, see, they, refugees, have some energy already. It should be enough. It is not our responsibility. We do not have the money. And this brings us to some of the darker themes within the book and within my research. I become quite critical of the humanitarian system, as many of the interviewees that I spoke to were highly critical, and some of the situations I saw were, to some extent, unbelievable. Before we turn to that, let's talk a little bit about who supplies energy, who is the providers of energy in refugee camps. On the left, many people might assume that it's governments. Maybe, sometimes. Places are national grid connected. Humanitarian agencies like UNHCR, IOM, WFP, they supply their own energy via generators usually, or they fund the provision of firewood as well for refugee households. NGOs similarly supply their own energy and their own generators and pay for grid connections, and they deliver projects to supply some, emphasis on some, refugees with cook stoves, solar lanterns, and sometimes microgrids, picogrids, etc. Refugees are the biggest constituent, and these boxes indicate amount as well as institutions. Refugees buy their own energy, lanterns, cooking fuel, electricity generation connections. They pay a disproportionate amount, a wildly disproportionate amount for their energy, estimated to be between 15 and 40% of their disposable income. As an indication, I think it's more in the UK, if you spend more than 5% of your disposable income, you're classed as being on extreme fuel poverty. So all refugees are in extreme fuel poverty. And some people call this self-provision by refugee communities, and it's through local markets. Underneath all of this is the private sector, hence the little orange box there. When preparing this talk, one colleague gave me the feedback that many people might be surprised by this, perhaps even scandalised by the idea that profit is being made off vulnerable refugees. But energy really challenges these conceptions. Many people in refugee camps want and are willing to work, and so create energy businesses as one of the areas that's not provided by the humanitarian system. The private sector at the end of the day can just be a guy who finds a generator or gets a solar panel up and working and plugs it in and starts charging people for use. You know, the private sector does not have to be the big Totals and, you know, giant energy companies. I'm sure we can come back to that in the question. Within the last two chapters of the book, I consider the politics of knowledge and inequality. For example, that refugee households and businesses have relatively little power and electricity, while offices and compounds are fully electrified, and that refugees in some countries, such as Jordan, are provided with higher levels of access, whereas in Kenya and Rwanda, provision is minimal. Inequality is explored not just in terms of access, who has electricity and cooking and not, but also inequality in terms of decision making, who knows about and who decides about energy. This raises the question, how is energy valued and who is it valued by? If refugees are living in the dark and humanitarians have Western level energy access, what does this suggest about humanitarian priorities on equality? What does it mean if energy is just another thing humanitarians should provide but don't have time for? In the wake of the political fallout from the US election and everything that's going on now with USAID, these questions become ever more pertinent. This quote demonstrates some of the systematic prejudices faced by refugees. This came from a conversation I was having with a very, very senior decision maker within one of the energy agencies, one of the humanitarian agencies working on energy in Kenya. This person said, energy is somehow my job now. My job description does not say energy anywhere, but I'm trying to do it, and I'm known as the energy guy. And I can do all the energy by myself. I will just plug it in and boom. So energy means more to me than it does to the humanitarian operation. It is more important for me and to me, but I'm also meaning that they, the humanitarian operation, does not think energy is important for refugees as it is for them. They think my phone is so important and I must have my computer. If the aircon is off and cannot do anything, I cannot do anything. If there is no power, they're getting very angry with me and saying, fix it now or things will happen. It is everything for them, really. But they also think it is not important for the people in the camps, people in the villages, in the sections. It is not an essential item. Why do they need it, they say. Why do you? I always ask them back. I am not a very popular person for asking this question. So we start to see some of these very political themes coming through now. To sum up, so that we have enough time for questions, a few key issues with the energy governance in refugee camps. Humanitarian responses on energy are chaotic. That's an understatement of the year. And the governance of sustainable energy for refugees is highly complex. I do have lots of academic evidence linked in this talk that proves that point. It's not just me saying that. Energy is not governed in a traditional way within the UN system, and most refugees access energy independently of the UN and NGOs. Again, there's evidence for that. I can put links and share a big Zotero library that proves all of these big statements. And then finally, refugees are not included in decision making, and displaced people are being left behind in the global sustainable energy transition. And we have a lot of lived experience evidence on that. This leads us to one of the final questions within the book on whether energy really is a human right. Should energy be compared to water, shelter, and some of the other human rights like protection? At the core of this question is the thought, can we survive without it? Anyone who's ever needed a hospital and the electricity within that hospital would say we can't survive without it, it's essential. But also we cannot cook our food or boil our water without fuel and heat. For the younger generations, is life without mobile phone even possible? But seriously, we couldn't have this event today without electricity. So it would seem to be pretty important to me. This quote is an example of a practitioner, an humanitarian energy practitioner who disagrees with that point of view. Is energy a human right? His answer is no. Look, it's just the basic technologies the refugees need. We are only here doing life-saving stuff, the basic things. Emergency action is blankets and bottles and tents. Not all these things you were talking about. You can live without a lantern. We can't provide all the luxuries. Really, once you start with that, where do you stop? Next, we will have to provide Wi-Fi and smartphones. Then what will the donors say? They say you are providing luxury, development, more than the people need to survive. We will be accused of being the luxury agency. No, we have to stick to the basic poverty goods, the NFIs, on food items. For my operation, the rule of thumb is, if you don't die without it, you don't get it. So you can see, not everybody agrees with me that energy is essential. A lot to unpack in that quote for any ethnographers or qualitative researchers out there. I will just skip on. One thing I've reflected on considerably is how political the humanitarian energy space is. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's just some technology, it's just, some solar panels, some diesel generators, some wires. It may sound banal to say that, but overall, I found that energy is fundamentally viewed from the outside as a technological problem. People saying, if we just fix it and get the right technology and the equipment to the right people, then the problem will be solved. But it isn't, and small-scale solutions such as individual solar lanterns aren't going to provide quality of life. Different choices are being made, and energy justice in this space is about both access to energy, physical lighting and physical connections, but also about energy justice in terms of participation and energy in decision making. And this may be not the group to present this to, because I feel like I'm talking to the converted, but when I present this to humanitarians, they're like, I just don't understand what you mean. So there are different worlds out there. The final quote, because hopefully this is a motivating call to action, is this one. We need to grow as a sector, grow or die. Energy is too invisible, too ignored, too unimportant to too many people. Either we go out of our little humanitarian energy bubble and tell people about how important this is, or it will keep being ignored. Otherwise, in 50 years, you and I will still be having the same conversations. Refugees will continue to be seen as victims, living in holes in the dark, and the humanitarian world will continue to be a black box of emissions as the sea rises around us. We need to reach out to others and bring in their expertise. Otherwise, it won't change. We have to change the way we work. Otherwise, we will replicate all the colonial and damaging ways of the past. And I should say, while the book is now published, the work of the humanitarian energy sector is far from finished. So whenever I feel tired or unmotivated, I go back to this quote to remind myself that we need to get moving. I will finish there, I think. For those interested in these issues in more detail, there is, of course, the book, self-promotion. But there is also a public Gresham lecture on this that's been recorded, which was part of the ISRF Gresham Migration series. And that covers some of the more basic technological things that I didn't have time for here. For those interested, if there's some students in the room interested on doing your master's thesis or research on this topic, there are some journal articles published on it, not just by me. We also have a Zotero library that I keep updated with as many references as we can on humanitarian energy. So there's a lot of resources out there, is all I'm trying to say.